Wyoming Territory, July 1883. The sun was barely up when the wagon wheel snapped, and the woman standing beside it did not flinch. Dust clung to her skirt, blood dried on the hem. Her eyes, sharp as broken glass, stared out over the empty plains like she was waiting for the world to finish what it started. Sarah Vennett had not spoken in hours, not since burying her second child 3 miles back under a bent cottonwood tree. The fever had taken both of them within days. First Daisy, then Daniel, 8 and 6. Her heart had not broken, it had gone quiet. The road between Rawlins and the Wind River was empty but for her busted wagon, a swayback mare hitched to nothing now, and the wind dragging grit over her boots. She had nothing left but a name and a worn photograph of 2 children laughing in a field they would never see again. A distant gallop cracked through the stillness like thunder, raising a trail of dust. She turned her head just enough to see the rider, a man, alone, tall in the saddle, a broad-brimmed hat low over his brow. He slowed as he neared, reining in his horse with a practiced hand. "You all right, ma'am?" His voice was low and steady, not too soft, not too concerned, just enough to reach her. Sarah did not answer. The man dismounted. His boots hit the dirt, coat flaring behind him as he stepped toward her. He was in his 30s, sun-browned, with a scar down one cheek that stopped just short of his jaw. He looked like someone who had lost things, someone who rode toward trouble instead of away from it. "I'm Silas O'Dale," he said, watching her. "Was headed north. Saw the wagon." Sarah looked at the broken wheel, then back at him. "It does not matter." He followed her gaze. "Looks like it snapped clean through the hub. You got tools?" She shook her head. He crouched by the wheel anyway, examining it. "I can fix it. Might take a while." "I am not going anywhere." Silas stood. His eyes were quiet, but not empty. "Where were you headed?" "Nowhere." "Ma'am, you are out here alone. That's not safe." She met his eyes. "It is too late for me." He stepped closer, and his answer came without hesitation. "Then I am right on time." For the first time in days, Sarah blinked. Silas glanced toward the wagon, then back at her. "Can I see to your horse?" "She looks dry." Sarah gave a small nod. He moved slowly, careful not to spook the mare, unhooking the harness and leading her toward his canteen. He poured water into a shallow tin and let the horse drink. The silence between them stretched, not heavy but settled. "Where are your people?" he asked gently. Sarah swallowed hard. "Buried." Silas nodded once. "I am sorry." She looked at him, jaw tight. "They were children." He said nothing, just stood there, hat in his hands, eyes fixed on the horizon. Like he knew there were no words to offer for that kind of hurt. When the sun rose higher, he set to work on the wheel. He used a hammer from his saddlebag, a few iron nails, and a length of rope to brace the broken spokes. It was not pretty, but it would roll. While he worked, Sarah sat on the edge of the wagon bed, hands in her lap. She did not cry. She had done all her crying back when Daisy's fever first climbed too high. "You heading toward Rivorton?" Silas asked once. "I was. Still can. I have no reason to." He looked up at her. "You do not have to know the reason yet. Just head in the right direction." She almost smiled, but it fell away before it reached her mouth. Later, when the wheel was fixed enough to move, he offered to ride beside her. She hesitated, then nodded. She did not want to be alone, not anymore, not with the silence pressing in so thick she could barely think. They rode slow, wagon creaking, hooves soft against the dirt. Once, she asked, "Why would you help someone like me?" He looked over, his face unreadable. "Because someone should have." That night, they camped beneath a low ridge, using brush for firewood. She sat across from him, her shawl pulled tight. He handed her coffee without a word. They drank in silence, the fire snapping between them. "Do you have family?" she asked. "Not anymore." She nodded. "You lost them too?" "Long time ago." That was all he said. She turned her eyes to the stars. "I keep thinking I will wake up and they will be there, laughing, fighting over the last biscuit, telling me stories I have heard 100 times." Silas reached across the fire, not to touch her, but to set his hand palm up between them. She stared at it for a moment. Then, without thinking, she placed hers in his. It was not a promise, just a breath of warmth in the cold. When the fire burned low, he stood. "You take the bedroll. I will keep watch." "You do not have to." "I know." The next morning, she woke to find coffee hot and ready, and Silas already saddling his horse. He gave her space, never pushing, just staying close enough to remind her she was not alone. By the third day, she caught herself watching him when he rode ahead to check the trail. The way he moved, like he belonged to the land, like nothing could shake him loose. When he came back, dust on his collar, she felt something stir in her chest she thought had died with her children. That night, as they sat by the fire again, she asked, "Why were you riding north?" He looked at her. "Looking for something." "Did you find it?" His voice was soft now. "Maybe I am starting to." The firelight flickered across his face. She studied him, the lines around his eyes, the way his mouth curved when he thought no one was looking. He was not handsome in the way of storybooks, but he was real, solid, and he had saved her, not with grand gestures, but with presence. "I was married once," she said. "He left when Daisy was 2. I never asked why." Silas nodded. "That makes him a fool." She looked down. "I was not easy to love." "You are still here," he said. "That counts for something." She glanced up, met his eyes. "Do you think people like us get another chance?" He reached forward, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "I do now." Her breath caught. For the first time in days, she felt her chest rise without pain. Silas leaned back, giving her space again, but she did not want it anymore. She shifted closer, her shoulder against his. He did not move. "You are kind," she whispered. "I just do not quit." They sat like that until the fire burned to embers, and the stars wheeled high above them. Neither moved, neither spoke, but something had shifted, and this time, when Sarah closed her eyes, she dreamed of warmth. By the 5th day, the sagebrush had thinned into low grassland, and the dry scent of juniper gave way to pine. They followed a path that curled along the base of the Owl Creek Mountains, the wind cooler here, rippling through the valley like a hush. Sarah walked beside the wagon now, reins in hand, skirts brushing against tall grass greening from a recent rain. Her steps were slower than his horse's gait, but Silas never rode far ahead. He stayed close enough that she could hear the leather creak under his saddle when he shifted, or the soft clink of his canteen when it knocked against his stirrups. They didn't speak much during the day, but in the evenings, when the fire was lit and the trail behind them lay quiet, words found their way out. That night, she reached for the coffee pot first, poured for both of them. He took the tin cup from her hand and nodded once in thanks. "I taught school once," she said, stirring the fire with a stick. "Back before the homestead. Just one room, 13 children on a good week." Silas looked up from his cup. "You liked it." "I did. Most days. One boy used to bring me wildflowers. Wouldn't say a word, just leave them in a jar." "What happened to the school?" "It burned." He waited, but she didn't go on. She poked at the ash. "I don't think I've said that out loud in 5 years." Silas reached for a piece of bread from his saddlebag and passed it over. "You miss it." "I miss who I was when I had it." He studied her for a long moment. "You're still that woman." No, she said. She believed in beginnings. He didn't argue, just leaned back against the log and watched the flames curl upward. When the fire wore low, she stood and walked a few paces into the dark. He didn't follow. She stood there for some time, listening to the night sounds, the distant call of a nighthawk, the rustle of leaves stirred by a breeze. When she returned, she didn't take her usual place across from him. Instead, she sat beside him, shoulder to shoulder. "You were a soldier," she said. He didn't ask how she knew. "I was," he answered. "Which side?" "Union." "Was it bad?" His jaw shifted, but his voice stayed even. "Sometimes, other times just quiet, waiting for something worse." She nodded. "That's what it feels like now. Like I'm always waiting for the next thing to break." He didn't touch her, didn't offer comfort. Just said, "Maybe you're past the worst of it." "I don't know if I believe that." "You don't have to. I'll believe it for both of us." The embers popped softly. She closed her eyes and leaned her head against his arm. He stayed still. The next morning, frost silvered the grass. He saddled his horse while she folded the blankets and rubbed warmth back into her fingers. They moved like two people used to silence but no longer burdened by it. As they rolled down into the basin, the land widened. Blue hills rose to the west, and a thin thread of river shimmered ahead. A stand of cottonwoods marked its edge. At the water, she knelt and washed her face, letting the chill startle her mind awake. When she stood, Silas was fixing the wagon's cinch. She walked over, brushing drops from her cheeks. "They'll be holding a market in Riverton this week," he said without looking up. "Traders come down the pass. You could sell that wagon if you wanted to." She crossed her arms. "And then what?" "You could stay. Find work. There's a woman there runs a boarding house. Lost her husband last year. She could use help." Sarah glanced at the river, then back at him. "You've thought this through." "I have." "Why?" He straightened. "Because I want you to have choices." She studied him. "And if I didn't want to stay in Riverton, then I'd keep riding. If you wanted company, I'd ride with you." She looked at the wagon, the road ahead, the sun climbing over the ridge. "I haven't had much kindness in my life. Not without a cost." He walked to his horse, adjusting the saddlebag. "I'm not asking for anything." "I know," she said. "That's why it might matter." They followed the river until midday, the current tracking alongside them like a quiet companion. They passed a trapper's cabin, half collapsed, its roof gone to moss. Sarah paused to look at it. "I used to think I'd grow old in a house like that. With stove, quilts, maybe chickens." Silas dismounted and walked beside her. "You still could." She gave a dry laugh. "I don't even know where I'd start." "I do," he said. "You start by waking up tomorrow and seeing what's left." She looked at him, and for the first time her eyes didn't look hollow, just tired, but open. They camped that night near a bluff, where the wind carried the scent of pine sap and the stars stretched wide above. She didn't ask for his hand, but she reached for it anyway, threading her fingers through his. He didn't speak, just held her hand while the fire burned low and the night deepened around them. Somewhere, coyotes called across the valley. She didn't flinch. Not anymore. They reached Riverton by dusk, the town sitting low against the land like it had grown there by accident, just a scatter of buildings cut from pine and fir, smoke curling from stovepipes and the sharp scent of coal dust clinging to the air. A few wagons rolled slow over the rutted main street. Horses stood tied outside the mercantile and a small livery barn, ears flicking at flies. Sarah kept her shoulders square as they passed through. She didn't look at the faces. Most didn't look back. Those who did, didn't linger. Silas guided them toward the far edge of town, where a whitewashed house leaned against a split rail fence, its porch sagging slightly at the center. A woman with iron-gray hair stepped out as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron. She looked over the wagon, then at Sarah, and gave a small nod. "She's expecting us," Silas said quietly. Sarah didn't answer, but she handed him the reins and stepped down. Inside, the house smelled of soap and onions. The front room held a worn settee, a braided rug, and a row of tin-framed photographs on the mantel. The woman, Mrs. Carrington, showed Sarah to a back room with a narrow bed and a single window looking out on a line of poplars. "I've got linens clean," she said. "There's work in the kitchen if you want it. No pressure." "I'll earn my place," Sarah said. Mrs. Carrington didn't argue. That night, Sarah lay awake listening to the creak of floorboards and the faint clatter of horses in the distance. The room was still. She wasn't used to stillness that didn't ache. In the morning, she found Silas brushing down his horse behind the livery. Dew clung to the grass, and his coat was slung over the fence rail. "You sleeping all right?" he asked, not looking up. "I'm not sure yet." He gave the horse a final pat, then turned. "Mrs. Carrington say much?" "She said there's a widow 3 streets over who needs help keeping books. Her husband ran a freight line. Died last spring. She's behind on everything. That's something you'd want?" "I think I might." He nodded, then picked up his saddlebag. "You leaving?" she asked. "Not unless you want me to." She stepped closer, dust clinging to the hem of her dress. "I don't know what this is yet." "I'm not asking you to," he said. "I'm just staying close." She looked past him, toward the mountains that framed the western edge of town. "I used to think I'd keep moving until the grief got smaller. But it doesn't. It just settles different." Silas leaned against the rail. "Maybe it's not about outrunning it. Maybe it's about building something alongside it." She watched a crow lift from the barn roof and wheel into the sky. "I wouldn't know how to start." "You already did, the night you asked if people like us get another chance." She met his eyes. "And you said you believed we did." "I still do." She reached out, fingers grazing his wrist. "If you're staying close, you might as well stay for supper." His voice dropped. "I'd like that." That evening, she set the table inside Mrs. Carrington's kitchen, careful with the forks and the chipped china. She let her sleeves down, tied her hair back, and stood straighter than she had in months. He knocked once before entering, hat in hand, hair damp from where he'd cleaned up at the pump. He didn't say anything about the dress she wore, or the way her face looked softer in the lamplight. But when their eyes met, something old and quiet passed between them: recognition, not surprise. They ate slow, speaking little. Afterward, she walked him to the porch. The air smelled of turned earth and wood smoke. A lantern flickered in a window across the street. "You'll be here tomorrow?" she asked. "I will." She looked down at his hand, then back at him. "I'm not ready for everything. But I'm not afraid of tomorrow." His voice was steady. "Then I'll meet you there." She didn't kiss him. Not yet. But she stood close enough that the warmth of him settled through her dress and into her skin. And when he stepped away, it wasn't with hesitation, it was with the quiet understanding of a man who knew how to wait for spring after a long winter. Inside, she closed the door and leaned against it, heart still and strong in her chest. For the first time since the fever had taken her children, she didn't feel like a woman undone. She felt like a woman beginning. Morning came with the low clang of a milk pail and the sharp call of a rooster from somewhere behind the Carrington house. Sarah tied her apron, combed her hair back into a tight knot, and stepped out into the small yard where the washing line hung stiff with last night's frost. Her breath clouded before her as she worked the pump handle and filled the basin. By midday, she'd walked 2 streets over to the widow's house, a white clapboard set just off the wheel-rutted lane. The woman, Mrs. Leary, was younger than Sarah expected, with a child balanced on one hip and a ledge of unopened invoices spilling across her kitchen table. Sarah rolled up her sleeves without comment and began sorting the ledgers. She stayed until the baby fell asleep and the numbers began to make sense again. That evening, she found Silas where he said he'd be in the alley behind the blacksmith's, hands blackened with soot, helping a boy lift a sack of coal. The smith had hired him to patch fencing in exchange for board and meals. When Sarah appeared, Silas wiped his hands on a cloth and fell into step beside her without a word. She led him to the edge of town, where the river curved behind the grain store. The water moved slow and steady, carrying bits of leaves and broken twigs downstream. "I've been thinking," she said. He waited. "I want to try staying, not just for work, to see if I can make something that lasts." Silas nodded once. "That's yours to choose. Would you stay too?" "I already am." She turned to him, eyes searching. "Why? You don't owe me anything." "I never said I did," he said. "But I want to be where you are." She studied his face creased at the corners from sun and wind, a faint line above his brow where a healed wound had puckered. She'd memorized him over the days without realizing it. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked. "I think about what's in front of me. Right now, that's you." She stepped closer, enough to feel the warmth rising off his coat. "I don't know how to be someone's anything anymore. You don't have to know yet. You just have to let me be here." His voice was quiet but certain. She looked out at the river, where the current caught the last light of day and scattered it like coins into the reeds. "I used to plant calendula along the porch rail," she said. "Bright orange. They bloomed even when the rest of the garden failed. You could plant them here." "I might." The wind tugged at the edge of her shawl. Silas reached up, gently tucking it back over her shoulder. His hand lingered, not possessive, just steady. "You want to walk back?" he asked. She shook her head. "I want to stay here a little longer." He sat in the grass beside her, knees drawn up, eyes on the water. She sat too, her skirt pooling around her ankles, and leaned into his side. No words passed between them for a while, just the sound of the river and the hush of wind through dry grass. Eventually, she said, "You didn't ask what happened to my husband." "I didn't need to. I married him because I was afraid to be alone." She paused. "That fear cost me more than I realized." Silas didn't press. He waited. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said. "But I'm tired of holding everything at arm's length." He turned to her. "Then don't." She looked at him, eyes steady now. "You said once that you don't quit." "I meant it. I want something quiet," she said. "Something honest. I don't care about grand things. Just someone who shows up." "I'm not going anywhere, Sarah." She took his hand, fingers lacing with his. When they stood, the sun had dipped behind the hills, and the first evening stars had begun to show. They walked back through the town together, her hands still in his, the road ahead wide and open. They didn't speak of love. Not yet. But when they reached her porch and she turned to him, she didn't hesitate. She leaned up, touched her mouth to his, not quick, not uncertain. A kiss that said, "I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you." When she stepped back, she didn't look away. Silas said, "Tomorrow." She nodded. "Every day after." And inside, as she shut the door behind her, her heart beat calm and even. Not because the past was gone, it never would be, but because, for the first time since it broke, she'd allowed something good to grow beside it. The wind shifted warmer by late March, and the last of the ice slipped from the riverbanks, leaving the water clear and quick under the cottonwoods. Sarah stood near the garden behind Mrs. Carrington's house, a spade in her hands, sleeves rolled to her forearms. The ground was soft enough now to turn. She worked slow, steady, shoulders set to each motion. Silas walked up the path carrying a wooden crate. "Got something for you," he said, setting it down in the grass. She brushed soil from her palms. "You didn't trade your rifle for seeds, did you?" "No," he said, lifting the crate's lid. "But I did give up 3 mornings of fence work for these." Inside lay paper-wrapped bundles labeled in careful script: beans, squash, calendula, and sweet peas. Her eyes landed on the last. "That one's for me. The others are for us," he said, kneeling beside her. "If you're still thinking of staying." "I am," she said, voice low. "It's a strange thing, realizing I want something again." Silas thumbed a bit of dirt from the corner of her mouth. "You've earned that want." She touched the seed packet, then looked up. "I'd like to build something, not just a garden." He met her eyes. "Then tell me what you need." "I need a house, not big. 1 room to sleep, 1 to cook, a porch. I know a man south of town, has cedar ready for milling. I can trade him labor." Sarah pressed her hand to his. "And if I help build it, then it's ours." They started clearing a patch of land just beyond the edge of Riverton, near a bend in the river where pine gave way to open slope. The town council had marked it for settlement, and no one had claimed it. Sarah filed her name with the clerk, and by week's end, she and Silas had staked corners with dry limbs and twine. She spent her days sorting accounts at Mrs. Leary's and sewing curtains in the evenings, while Silas worked with the millwright, hauling timber and cutting joists. They met at dusk, sometimes sharing bread on the riverbank, sometimes just sitting with their boots in the grass and the sky turning orange above them. One evening, Sarah reached into her satchel and pulled out a folded square of linen. "I started something," she said, offering it to him. He unfolded it slowly. A stitched outline of their house walls, roof, porch with initials tucked in the corner. S+S. "I wanted to see it before it stood," she said. Silas traced the thread with his thumb. "You're not afraid anymore?" "I'm still afraid," she said. "But I want this more than I want safe." He reached for her hand. "Then we'll build with both." By late summer, the house stood. Pine floors, a small hearth, windows that opened toward the west. The porch held 2 chairs he crafted himself, rough-hewn but strong. Sarah hung the curtains she made, yellow calico that caught the light in the late afternoon. They moved in on a Sunday. No ceremony, just a quiet walk from town with a cart of belongings and the promise of something whole. That night, she lit the lantern and watched it glow against the walls they'd raised together. Silas stood behind her, arms around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder. "I never thought I'd come back to this," she said. "To what?" "To being chosen." "You weren't chosen," he said. "You were found." She turned in his arms. "And you?" "I was waiting," he said. "Didn't know it, till you looked at me like I was worth staying for." She kissed him, then not a question, not a beginning, but a vow that needed no words. They married in their own front room, with Mrs. Carrington holding a small bouquet of sage and wild rose, and the town clerk reading the vows. No dress, no suit, just 2 people, hands clasped, eyes steady. Afterward, they shared a meal under the cottonwoods, neighbors bringing smoked trout, cornbread, and rhubarb preserves. The boy from the blacksmith's brought a fiddle. Laughter mingled with crickets and the sound of boots against dry grass. Days passed into weeks. The garden bloomed high with beans and sunflowers, and the calendula spread in wide orange bursts along the porch rail. Sarah opened a small ledger service in town, and Silas took on carpentry work, known for showing up early and never leaving a board out of place. One morning, Sarah stood at the stove, turning griddle cakes, when Silas entered with a folded letter in his hand. "What's that?" she asked. "From the school board," he said, placing it on the table. "They want to open a schoolhouse north of town." looking for someone to run it. Sarah wiped her hands on a cloth. I thought that part of me was gone. It's not, he said. They heard about you. Mrs. Leary said you were the only one who ever made her books make sense. She looked at the letter, then at him. You think I could do it? I know you can. She folded it carefully. Then I'll say yes. That evening, they sat on the porch, watching the sun set behind distant hills. Sarah leaned into Silas, her head on his shoulder, his hand resting on her knee. You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that day? She asked. I try not to, he said, because I didn't miss it. She smiled. Neither did I. Silas kissed her hair. You're the strongest woman I've ever known. I'm the luckiest, she whispered. The wind picked up, rustling the calendula. In the distance, the river moved steady and sure, carrying no sorrow now, only the sound of a life unfolding. And inside the small home they built with their own hands, the lantern glowed warm against the walls, lighting everything they'd chosen together.